Hi, you're right. I'm going to talk through the page of the Algebra 4 pack about gradient and y-intercept. Now we've been dealing with graphs. The last lesson we were plotting them using tables, and these are called tables of values, so they're x coordinates and y coordinates basically. But there are other ways we can plot straight line graphs. We can plot them just by looking at their equation actually, especially if they're written in this form. So we call this slope-intercept form. And that's because just looking at these numbers can tell us the slope, in other words the steepness of the line, and also the intercept, where it intercepts the y-axis. And if you think about it, with those two bits of information, then we've got enough info to draw a straight line. We know where to start the line, and we know how steep it's going to be, so we can draw the rest. Okay, so when it's written in this form, y equals something x plus something else, because we will have numbers here instead of m and c. The m stands for the gradient or slope. Okay, don't ask me why they use the letter m, I'm not sure. C stands for the y-intercept. Okay, so c is the number on the y-axis that the line goes through. Okay, so the y-intercept is easy enough to spot. You can just see it on the graph. It's the number that it goes through on the y-axis. But the gradient, this number here, the slope, is the number you get when you divide the rise by the step, or the rise by the run is another way of explaining it. It's always the rise divided by the run. Okay, so we're going to work out the gradients of these lines. So the rise of this one, let me just draw in what I've got there. The rise there is 4. Gone up 4, whoops. And the run was 1. So 4 divided by 1 is 4. On the next one, the rise was 4 and the run was 4. So 4 divided by 4 gives a gradient of 1. On part C, the rise is 5. It's got 5 up, and the run is 1. So 5 divided by 1 gives a gradient of 5. And you can see that a line with a gradient of 5 is steeper than a line with a gradient of 4. Okay, part D, the rise was 4, the run was 2. So rise divided by run, 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now we didn't have to use the endpoints of the line. I could have also done it by just looking at this bit here, saying that there's a rise of 2 for a run of 1. But if I divide those, 2 divided by 1, I would still get a gradient of 2. So it really doesn't matter which points on the line we choose. I'm just going to use the endpoints for this task. Now this line has a rise of 6 and a run of 4. So 6 divided by 4 is the same as 1.5 or 1.5. And on on line F, we've got a rise of 5 and a run of 5 as well. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So that one has the same gradient as line B. Okay, if you look at these lines, they do have the same steepness. G has a rise of 5 or a run of 2. Now rise divided by run, 5 divided by 2, what's half of 5? 2.5. Okay, and H has a rise of 0, it doesn't rise at all, and a run of 3, goes 3 across, so that gives a gradient of 0. Okay. We move on to question 2 to finish off the page. This exercise is just about looking at an equation and spotting the gradient or the slope. I'll just put slope there as well. And the y-intercept just from the equation. So you can see here the gradient or the slope is the number in front of x. It's the number in front of x, or the coefficient of x if you want to be really fancy. The y-intercept is the number that's on its own. And we should include the sign in front of that number as well, unless it's just positive, and then we don't need to put +4. We can just put 4. On the next one, the gradient would be 2, and because 2 is the number in front of x, and the y-intercept is -5. So I am going to put the negative because we do that on negative numbers. The number in front of x on the next equation is 1/2. Okay, or you could write 0.5, but they put 1/2, so I'll put 1/2. And the y-intercept is 1. No point putting +1, we can just put 1. Now this one's a bit different, it's the other way around. The number on its own is here in front, and the number with an x is the second thing, the second term on that side of the equal sign, but that's okay, the same rules apply. The gradient is still the number in front of x, but this time the number in front of x, we have to include the sign as well, it is -3. And the number on its own, remember that negative belongs with the 3, the number on its own is just +2. And the reason it's probably written like that, this way around this time, is because mathematicians like to start with positive numbers. So if they have a positive, they'll put it at the front, rather than writing y equals -3x plus 2. Okay, and we've got to write the equations for these last two. So the number in front of x is going to be 1. So I could write y equals 1x, but those of you who know your algebra know that we don't often put a 1 in front of an x. You wouldn't be penalised if you did. And the y-intercept is 0. So should I put +0 at the end? Well, again, you wouldn't be wrong. You wouldn't be marked down if you did that. But it's just not needed, is it? We don't need to say +0 after anything because there's nothing to do. And the last one, we've got a gradient of -2. So I'm going to put y equals -2x. And a y-intercept of -7, so that goes there, -7 at the end. Okay.